Do you believe death is the end? That when someone disappears, their story is over? I used to believe that too, until I uncovered what really happens in the darkest places, where death isn't the end. It's the beginning of something far more horrifying. And what I'm about to reveal will change everything you thought you knew about life and death. In a secluded town, a reality you'd never imagined starts to unfold. People vanish, but not because someone killed them. They're taken, and the worst part is they come back. They're not the same. They're no longer human. And what goes on inside a crematorium? It's just the tip of the iceberg. It's not what you think. And I promise you, you never imagined something this twisted was happening while you slept safely in your bed. Now, let me ask you this. Do you believe souls truly rest in peace? Or is there something far more sinister that keeps them trapped beyond death? Something that forces people to return, but never as they were before? Don't believe me just yet. But what I'm about to show you will shake everything you think you know about the afterlife. And by the end, you'll be asking yourself if any of us are really safe from the fate of only dying. Are you ready to discover the secret no one dares reveal? Stay with me until the end of this video, because what you're about to witness will shatter your understanding of the supernatural in ways you never thought possible. At the edge of the city, hidden away from the public eye, stand a place many try not to think about. A crematorium, a quiet, sterile building where death is handled with precision. No one notices the dark corners or the things that seem to stir in the shadows. But there are things that shouldn't be there, things that can't be explained by science or reason. And in this crematorium, they've started to reveal themselves. Steve had worked there for years, and death had long become a routine for him. But it wasn't until one fateful night that he noticed something he couldn't forget. Alone on his late-night shift, he walked past the cremation chamber, about to check on the furnace, when he froze. The door to the crematorium was slightly ajar, not open wide, just enough for someone to slip through unnoticed. He couldn't remember leaving it like that. With a cautious step, he approached, but as he did, a faint, unsettling whisper brushed against his ear. It wasn't words, but something that made his skin crawl. He stepped inside, checking the furnace, but it was off. And yet, the room smelled of burning flesh. The scent lingered, thick and heavy, like something or someone was still burning. Sarah had only been working there for a month, and already she noticed things that unsettled her. One night, while alone in the break room, she overheard the faintest whispering coming from the cremation room. Thinking it was just her nerves, she decided to ignore it. But the whispers grew clearer and more distinct. She could make out her name, Sarah. Her heart raced. She knew she had heard it clearly, and it wasn't her imagination. Her pulse quickened as she approached the cremation room, heart pounding in her chest. But the moment she stepped inside, the whispers stopped. She found nothing. The room was cold, darker than it should have been for that time of night. When she glanced toward the furnace, she saw a shadow, a figure standing just outside the doorway. It was human-shaped, but it wasn't right. The figure didn't move, didn't even breathe. Sarah blinked and it vanished. And then there was Marcus. He had only been working at the crematorium for a month, still trying to adjust to the unusual atmosphere. One night, while performing routine maintenance, he found a dusty, old journal hidden in a storage closet. It was a journal of a former worker, but what stood out was the last entry. The worker wrote about hearing voices from the furnace, seeing glimpses of figures in the reflection of the glass, and feeling something pulling them toward the flames. The journal ended abruptly. There was no conclusion, just a final line. They're still here, watching, waiting. As time went on, The three workers, Steve, Sarah, and Marcus, couldn't ignore the growing sense of dread in the crematorium. They began to piece things together, realizing that they weren't experiencing isolated incidents. Something was drawing them in, something tied to the very flames that consumed the bodies. There were moments when they felt an overwhelming pressure, as if they were being watched by eyes that didn't belong to any living person. But who could have known what was truly going on inside that crematorium? One evening, with their nerves stretched thin, the three decided to confront the source of their fear. Together, they entered the cremation room. As they stepped inside, the temperature dropped suddenly. Their breath became visible in the cold air, though it was a warm summer night. The flames flickered, casting long, twisted shadows on the walls. And then it happened. The door to the furnace slowly creaked open, as though it was inviting them in. They hesitated, fear gnawing at their insides. They tried to turn away, but something drew them back. They had to know, what could possibly be so wrong with a place like this? They approached the furnace together, their hands trembling. The flames inside seemed to move unnaturally, almost as if they were alive. Then they saw it. The figure that emerged from the furnace wasn't what they expected. It wasn't a ghost. It wasn't an angry soul trapped in the flames. It wasn't even human. It was a reflection. The flames had shown them something they couldn't comprehend, something that should never be seen. The shape, the outline, it was them, but it wasn't. They were looking at their own faces, twisted and burned beyond recognition. In that moment, the truth dawned on them. The crematorium didn't just burn bodies. It burned memories. It burned souls. It burned the very essence of who they were. And as long as they worked there, they would never escape it. The flames had claimed them, just like it claimed every soul that passed through the furnace. The three workers never returned to the crematorium. The place was abandoned soon after. But rumors persist. People say the crematorium is still standing. And if you listen closely, you can hear faint whispers coming from the furnace room. Are they the whispers of lost souls? Or is something else waiting? But that's not the only place where death and the supernatural are intertwined. Just a few miles away, there's another location where something even darker lurks in the shadows. A place where the line between life and death blurs completely. The next story comes from a place where the living tend to avoid, an old morgue, long abandoned by authorities but never fully forgotten. And just like in the crematorium, it seems that whatever remains there, it doesn't stay dead for long. Rumors have long circulated about the abandoned morgue just a few miles from the crematorium. Like many places left to decay, it had a history of inexplicable disappearances, and those brave enough to venture near it spoke of strange occurrences. Noises that didn't belong to the living, shadows that moved on their own, and cold spots that froze the air. But no one knew the truth of what had happened inside. Until now. The morgue had been shut down years ago after a series of bizarre incidents, but it wasn't forgotten. The locals had always whispered about what went on behind those thick, decaying walls. Those who worked there before it was closed often spoke of something unnatural in the basement, a place where the cold was more than just temperature, and where the bodies seemed to move on their own. It wasn't until a group of urban explorers decided to spend the night inside that the story truly began to unravel. They had heard the rumors, seen the creepy photos online, but nothing prepared them for what they were about to experience. The team consisted of 4 friends, Amy, Jack, Paul, and Lisa, each one eager to discover the truth behind the dark rumors. They arrived at the morgue just after midnight, the cold air pressing down on them as they pushed open the heavy, rusted doors. The moment they stepped inside, the temperature seemed to drop. The familiar chill of death hung heavy in the air, and yet there was something more. something wrong. As they walked through the long, narrow halls, their flashlights flickered erratically. It wasn't just a lack of electricity. It was as if the light itself was unwilling to remain in the darkness of the building. The silence was overwhelming, broken only by the occasional creak of the old structure. But then they heard it, the faintest whisper. At first, they thought it was just the wind or their own nerves getting the better of them. But the whispers became clearer, closer. They turned their heads sharply but saw nothing. It wasn't until they reached the basement door that they truly understood what they were up against. The basement door was locked, but with little effort, Paul managed to force it open. As they descended the stairs, a cold draft swept past them. The scent of decay was stronger here, mixed with the unmistakable odor of something more alive. The deeper they went, the more oppressive the atmosphere became. It was like the air itself was thick with secrets, begging to remain hidden. In the basement, the walls were lined with old metal drawers, some left open, some shut tightly, as if they had been disturbed recently. They approached one of the open drawers, and what they saw made their blood run cold. A body lay inside, but it wasn't what they expected. The body had been moved. It was positioned strangely, its arms raised above its head, as if trying to break free from the confines of the drawer. The skin was pale, but there was something else, something that shouldn't be there. The face was familiar. Amy stepped back in horror. This can't be real, she whispered. That face, it looks like my mother. The others froze. They knew Amy's mother had passed away years ago, under mysterious circumstances. They had all been at her funeral, watching her body lowered into the ground. But here in this morgue, her face stared back at them, twisted and cold. As they tried to comprehend the impossible sight before them, they heard a noise, scraping, faint at first, but then louder. It was coming from the drawers. Amy's eyes widened in terror as the body in the drawer began to move, its fingers twitching as if trying to free itself. The air became thick with the unmistakable sense of something alive in the morgue. Panicked, they rushed to leave the basement, but as they ran up the stairs, they realized that something was blocking their exit. The door at the top of the stairs was now completely shut, the doorknob turning by itself. From the other side of the door, they heard a voice that didn't belong to any living person. It was low and guttural, and it spoke in a language none of them recognized. Lisa, shaking, tried to push the door open, but it wouldn't budge. The whispers grew louder. The scraping sounds from the basement intensified. And then the sound of something large dragging itself across the floor, coming closer. In that moment, the truth of what happened in the morgue became undeniable. This was no ordinary building. It wasn't just abandoned. It had been left for a reason. The bodies weren't just corpses. They had been awakened. Something had crossed into the living world through the morgue. And whatever it wasn't going to let them leave without a price. Just as the door began to open on its own, the group stumbled backward in terror. They knew, deep down, they weren't alone anymore. And as the darkness of the basement loomed over them, they understood the truth. Some doors, once opened, can never be closed. To this day, no one knows what happened to Amy, Jack, Paul, or Lisa. The morgue remained sealed, the building's history erased, as if someone or something wanted to ensure no one would ever know the full story. But there are still those who claim to hear the whispers from the basement late at night, and others say that on rare occasions, you can see shadows moving the windows of the abandoned building. The world is full of mysteries that defy explanation. Stories of places where the dead walk, where the living vanish without a trace, and where the boundaries between life and death become blurred. But there is one place, isolated, far from the prying eyes of society, that has remained hidden for years, a place where the lines between the living and the dead no longer exist, and where the missing are brought back, changed. The town of Black Hollow had always been a quiet, forgotten place. Tucked away deep in the forest, no one seemed to know much about it. Those who lived there rarely ventured out, and outsiders were few and far between. But something was happening there, something no one could explain. It started with the disappearances. People would simply vanish, one after another, without warning. At first, it was thought to be the work of a serial killer, but no bodies were ever found. The police never investigated too deeply, as there was little evidence to go on. And then, after weeks or even months, those who disappeared would return. But they were never the same. It began with Emily Harris, a young woman from Black Hollow, who went missing one cold October night. Her parents were devastated, as were her friends. But after 2 months of silence, Emily came back. She walked right into her family home, her eyes vacant, her expression distant, as if she had forgotten everything about the world she once knew. Her family thought she was just traumatized, maybe from some terrible experience, but it was more than that. Emily's return was unnatural. She never spoke of where she had been or what had happened to her. She simply sat in the corner of her room, staring out the window, her eyes dark as though she was watching something no one else could see. Soon, other missing townspeople began to return. Jack, a local mechanic, Susan, a schoolteacher, even the mayor, who had vanished just days before Emily. They all came back, but something had changed. They weren't the same people who had left. They didn't remember much of their time away, and when they did speak, their voices carried an unsettling tone, like they were speaking on behalf of someone or something else. And then, one evening, a stranger arrived in Black Hollow, an outsider, someone who had heard the stories from nearby towns and wanted to see for himself. His name was Ben, and he was determined to uncover the truth behind the strange happenings in the town. But as soon as he arrived, he could feel it. The air was thick with something unspoken, something old lurking beneath the surface. Ben made his way to the local tavern, where the townspeople gathered. The place was dimly lit, the floor creaking beneath his feet as he walked in. The locals were there, talking in hushed voices. But when they saw him, the conversation stopped. Every pair of eyes turned toward him, cold and unreadable. It was then that Ben noticed them, the ones who had returned. Emily, Jack, Susan, and the others were sitting at the back of the room, staring at it with eyes that seemed to peer through him. He felt a chill crawl down his spine, and for the first time in his life, he understood the true meaning of fear. Ben asked about the disappearances, about the strange behavior of the returned, but no one answered. Instead, Emily stood up slowly, her gaze locked on him. Her lips curled into a faint, unsettling smile as she spoke in a voice that wasn't entirely hers. "You shouldn't have come here. There's no escaping it now." Ben tried to leave, but the door wouldn't open. It was as if the town itself had sealed him in. Panic set in as he realized the truth. Black Hollow wasn't a town like any other. It was a place where the dead didn't stay dead, and the living were bound by forces beyond their understanding. And those who vanished, they didn't return by choice. They came back because they were taken, changed, altered, and bound to a dark, ancient power that could not be broken. Desperate to escape, Ben ran to the outskirts of town. But as he crossed the boundary, something in the woods stopped him. He heard it before he saw it, an eerie, rhythmic sound like chanting coming from deep within the forest. It was then that he realized a horrible truth. The town wasn't just haunted by the dead. It was a place where the veil between worlds had been torn open, and whatever force had taken hold of Black Hollow was calling to him. It was too late. He wasn't just an outsider anymore. He was part of the town now, just like the others. The next morning, the townspeople were gone. No one knew where they went, but the signs were clear. The woods had claimed another soul. Ben was now one of them, lost in the folds of time, a part of a world that no one could ever fully understand. And so, Black Hollow remains a cursed place, hidden from the rest of the world. Those who venture too close are never seen again, and the ones who return are never the same. Some say the town is alive, feeding off the souls of those who wander too far, while others believe that the veil between life and death is thin there, and that whatever crosses it can never truly leave. If you listen closely on the wind, you might hear the faint whispers of those who have gone missing. And if you ever find yourself in the woods near Black Hollow, you might just feel the pull of something ancient waiting to claim you.